The car ride was steeped in silence, the tension thick enough to strangle. Eleanor Hale sat rigidly in the back seat, her fingers curled into fists on her lap. Outside, the neon glow of the city blurred past, a mockery of the world she once knew, the world she was being forced to leave behind. When the car finally rolled to a stop in front of Halstead Tower, the imposing skyscraper loomed over her like an unyielding fortress. A cold gust of wind slipped through the open door as the driver stepped out, offering no words, only expectation. Eleanor lifted her chin. She would not shrink. Inside, the penthouse was as lifeless as the man who owned it. Sleek, expensive, devoid of warmth. Dark marble stretched beneath dim lighting, and the walls stood bare except for floor-to-ceiling windows that displayed the city skyline. It was breathtaking in a way that felt empty. A deep voice sliced through the silence. "You took your time." At the far end of the room, Cassian Vale stood, hands in his pockets. His suit was immaculate, every detail of his presence radiating control. His voice, his stance, his eyes, they held no warmth, only calculated detachment. Eleanor's heartbeat quickened, but she met his gaze head-on, refusing to let him see any trace of weakness. "Do I get a say in this?" Her voice was steady. Cassian arched a brow, amusement flickering across his face before vanishing just as quickly. "No." He stepped forward, his presence unsettling in its intensity. "You belong to me now." A chill ran down Eleanor's spine, not from fear, but from something else. Anger. Defiance. A flicker of reckless defiance. She took a slow breath. If he expected obedience, he was about to be disappointed. Her lips curled slightly, her voice calm but sharp as steel. "Then, let me show you what it really means to own a fire." For the first time, something in Cassian's expression shifted. Interest. Annoyance. Maybe even a flicker of something more dangerous. A storm was brewing between them. Neither knew who would survive it. The silence of the penthouse was oppressive. Eleanor lay on the massive guest bed, staring at the ceiling, sleep refusing to come. The space around her was pristine, untouched, more of a showroom than a home. The coldness of it settled deep in her bones. She wasn't afraid, not exactly. Unease curled inside her, not because she was trapped in Cassian Vale's world, but because of the man himself. He was unreadable, controlled. But beneath that exterior, something was wrong. She slipped out of bed, her bare feet making no sound against the cold marble. If she was going to survive here, she needed to understand him. Moving cautiously, she stepped into the hallway. The penthouse was massive, yet despite its size, it felt eerily empty. No signs of life, no personal touches, just a fortress of glass and steel. A faint sound caught her attention. Through the dimly lit space, she spotted him. Cassian stood by the bar, alone, staring at the city beyond the towering windows. Eleanor stilled. He hadn't seen her yet. A tumbler of dark liquid rested in his hand, his grip too tight around the glass. He lifted it to his lips, taking a slow, deliberate sip. Then another. The muscles in his jaw tensed. She watched as he set the glass down, then pressed his hands against the counter, his head bowing slightly. Not in exhaustion, in restraint. The room smelled faintly of whiskey. Now that she was paying attention, she noticed something deeper. The untouched meal from earlier. The rigid set of his shoulders. The exhaustion etched into his face. He didn't sleep, he barely ate, and he drank just enough to take the edge off. But not enough to lose control. For a man who had power over everything, he seemed to be fighting a battle no one else could see. Before she could retreat, his voice cut through the quiet. "I know you're there." Eleanor froze. Cassian turned his head slightly, his gaze finding hers in the dim light. His expression remained unreadable, but something flickered in his eyes. "Do you make a habit of sneaking around?" His voice was smooth, unbothered. She raised a brow. "Do you make a habit of drinking alone in the dark?" A shadow of amusement crossed his face before disappearing. "Go back to bed, Eleanor." It wasn't a request. Then his phone vibrated against the counter. Something in him changed. His entire demeanor shifted, tension rippling through his frame. His grip on the glass tightened before he set it down with precision. The phone rang once, twice, then he answered. "I told you not to call me." His voice was lower now, edged with something lethal. A pause. "I don't care what you have. If you make this public, I will bury you." A chill settled in Eleanor's chest. Whoever was on the other end of that call had power over him. And she intended to find out why. Morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the vast emptiness of the penthouse. Eleanor sat at the long dining table, untouched breakfast in front of her. Across from her, Cassian sipped his coffee, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his tone was calm but firm. "There are rules." She met his gaze, unblinking. "You don't speak unless spoken to. You don't touch anything that isn't yours, and you don't leave this penthouse." A brief pause. "Ever." Eleanor let the weight of his words settle, a gilded cage, wrapped in luxury. She lifted her chin slightly. "And if I do?" Cassian set his cup down with quiet precision. "You won't." There was no need for threats. His certainty was enough. But Eleanor had never been one to follow orders without reason. The first test came that afternoon. She wandered the penthouse, fingers brushing over the cold, pristine surfaces. She didn't break his rule. Not entirely. She wasn't touching his things, merely observing them. The difference was subtle. But she knew men like Cassian Vale. They lived on control, and every small act of defiance was another thread waiting to unravel. Every small act of defiance was a thread unraveling his control. When Eleanor Hale wandered into Cassian Vale's private study, skimming the spines of expensive first editions, she expected fury. Instead, he watched her with something sharper. "You don't listen," he said, his voice low, measured. Eleanor turned, meeting his eyes with an almost imperceptible smirk. "You don't like being ignored." His jaw tensed. In 2 strides, he closed the space between them, his hand catching her wrist before she could step away. The air between them tightened. "You think this is a game?" His voice was controlled, but beneath it something simmered. Eleanor held his gaze, unwavering. "I think you want it to be." Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken things. But then, just as abruptly as he had grabbed her, he let go. A retreat. She took a slow, steadying breath. She wasn't afraid of him. And that was the real problem. Later that night, Eleanor found herself in the library, curled up in one of the deep leather chairs, a book open in her lap. The fabric of Cassian's shirt draped over her frame, loose and oversized, drowning her in a warmth that didn't belong to her. He exhaled as he stepped inside, his gaze flickering over her. "That's mine." She didn't look up. "Then maybe you shouldn't leave it where someone might take it." This time, he didn't stop her. The air in the penthouse had shifted. Over the next few days, tension crept in like an unseen force. Cassian was different, more distant, more irritable. His usual ironclad control remained, but there were cracks forming. Cracks Eleanor was beginning to notice. She first sensed the change after a phone call. She had been wandering the penthouse when she heard it. Cassian's voice, low and clipped, sharp enough to cut through the thick walls of his office. She only caught one name: Juliet. Eleanor didn't know much about Cassian's world, but she knew that name meant trouble. That evening, she stumbled upon something odd. A door, unlike the others, locked. She had never seen Cassian enter or leave through it. In a space where everything was curated to perfection, the presence of something forbidden stood out like a flaw in marble. Her fingers hovered over the handle, testing it lightly. Locked as expected. But why? Before she could investigate further, a voice cut through the stillness. "You're running out of ways to push me." Eleanor turned slowly. Cassian stood a few feet away, his gaze unreadable. But there was something colder in his expression now. She tilted her head. "I was just looking around. And now you're done." The sharp finality in his voice sent a clear message. Whatever was behind that door, he wasn't going to let her near it. That night, she barely slept. Somewhere in the thick silence of the early hours, a sound pulled her from the edge of rest. A voice, low, pained, hesitating only for a moment, she slipped out of bed. The penthouse was dark, but the faint glow from Cassian's bedroom door, half open, guided her steps. She shouldn't have gone in, but she did. Cassian was tangled in the sheets, his breathing uneven, his forehead damp with sweat. A nightmare. Eleanor hesitated for only a second before reaching out, her fingers barely grazing his shoulder. The reaction was instant. Cassian jerked awake, his grip closing around her wrist so tightly she gasped. His breathing was ragged, his eyes unfocused, his body rigid with tension. For a fraction of a second, she saw something raw in his gaze. Then, sharp clarity returned. He let go, as if burned. His face hardened. "Don't touch me." Eleanor swallowed the sting of his words but didn't look away. Cassian turned from her, running a hand down his face. Whatever she had just witnessed, whatever haunted him in the dark, he would never let her close enough to understand it. It happened without warning. Eleanor had spent the evening keeping to herself, flipping through books in the library, trying to ignore the undercurrent of tension lingering in the penthouse. Cassian had been colder, harsher, ever since that nightmare. And then, in the dead of night, a crash. She stood abruptly, her pulse kicking up. For a moment she debated ignoring it. Let him handle himself, let him drown in whatever storm was consuming him. But she moved before she could stop herself. The dimly lit living room was eerily silent. But wrong. The scent of whiskey lingered in the air. Then she saw him. Cassian lay on the floor, half-conscious, one hand gripping the edge of the couch as if he had tried to pull himself up. A shattered glass lay nearby, dark liquid seeping into the floor. Eleanor rushed to his side, hesitating only for a second before touching his shoulder. His skin was burning. "Cassian," she whispered. His eyes fluttered open, glassy and unfocused. His breath came in shallow drags, his face drawn tight with exhaustion. He had pushed himself too far. Again. Her fingers brushed over his pulse. Unsteady. Erratic. He needed water, rest, anything but more alcohol. She moved to help him sit up, but his fingers suddenly curled around her wrist, stopping her. His voice was barely above a whisper, rough from sleep. "It was never supposed to be me." A shiver ran down her spine. "What?" she asked, frowning, leaning closer. "What wasn't?" But Cassian was slipping again, his grip loosening, his body giving in to exhaustion. Whatever he meant, he wouldn't be saying anything else tonight. Eleanor exhaled, carefully maneuvering him onto the couch. For the first time, she saw him as something else, not the cold, untouchable man, but something fragile beneath the surface. By morning, Eleanor had barely slept. She heard him before she saw him, the sharp, angry clatter of a cup hitting the counter in the kitchen. When she stepped inside, Cassian was already dressed, his back to her, tension radiating off him in waves. Then he turned, his eyes locked onto her, dark and unreadable. "You will not speak of last night, ever." His voice was steel, but she didn't miss the tightness in his jaw. He was furious, not at her, at himself, for letting her see the cracks. To his surprise, Eleanor only tilted her head, her voice as calm as it was sharp. "Then maybe next time you should take better care of yourself." She didn't wait for a response. She didn't need one. The tension in the penthouse had shifted from silent weariness to something sharper, and Eleanor could feel it, in the way Cassian Vale watched her, not with curiosity, but calculation. Something had changed, and neither of them knew what to do with it. She didn't need to meet Juliette Laurent to know the woman was trouble. The whispers had already slipped through the cracks, tension winding tighter around Cassian Vale. Eleanor could see it in the way he studied her now, not with the same silent intrigue as before, but with something darker. Doubt. Juliette was planting seeds, twisting things in his mind, making him question whether Eleanor was something more than she seemed. And then Eleanor found the article. It wasn't hidden, but it wasn't exactly left in plain sight either. Tucked between the pages of a book, folded, creased as if read too many times. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded it. The paper was old, yellowed at the edges, but the headline was still clear. Nathaniel Hale, heir to Hale Industries, missing. Presumed dead. She read it twice, her breath caught somewhere between shock and realization. Cassian Vale didn't exist. Not really. The sound of footsteps behind her sent ice down her spine. She barely had time to react before the newspaper was ripped from her hands. When she turned, Cassian was staring at her, his eyes burning with something dangerous. "Where did you find this?" His voice was low, controlled, but she could hear the warning beneath it. Eleanor met his gaze, refusing to back down. "It was here, you kept it." His jaw tightened. "That doesn't mean you were meant to see it." She exhaled, steadying herself. "Who is Nathaniel Hale?" A dangerous silence fell between them. For a moment she thought he might answer, that he might finally let her in, but then the walls slammed back into place. "Forget you ever saw this." She watched as he crushed the paper in his fist, his expression cold, detached. But Eleanor had seen it now, and she wasn't the type to forget. Cassian didn't sleep that night. He stood by the window, watching the city sprawl beneath him, the lights flickering like dying embers. No amount of power, no name he had built for himself, could erase what he used to be. Nathaniel Hale. The name clawed its way back from the grave, dragging old ghosts with it. He had buried that life long ago. Or so he thought. But now, Eleanor knew. His hands curled into fists, frustration simmering in his chest. She wasn't supposed to see that article. She wasn't supposed to dig where she didn't belong. And yet, a part of him knew this was inevitable. The past had always been waiting for him to slip. By morning, he found her in the library. She was sitting cross-legged on the couch, a book open in her lap. But she wasn't reading. She was waiting. She didn't look surprised when he walked in. "You're avoiding me," Cassian exhaled slowly. "I don't owe you an explanation." Eleanor tilted her head. "You do if you expect me to live in a house built on secrets." His jaw clenched. He had been through enough negotiations to recognize a battle of wills, and yet this was different. She wasn't asking for power. She wasn't threatening leverage. She just wanted the truth. For the first time in years, he considered giving it to her. He sat across from her, leaning forward, resting his forearms on his knees. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but sharp. Nathaniel Hale died the night his family did. Eleanor's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes softened. She didn't push. She didn't demand more. So he kept going. "My father was a ruthless businessman, the kind that didn't make enemies, he made executioners. One night when I was 17, the consequences of that life came knocking. Fire, glass shattering, screams. I barely made it out. My family didn't. My survival was a mistake, one the people responsible would have corrected if I had stayed Nathaniel Hale. So I became someone else. Cassian Vale, built from ashes, forged in control, untouchable." Eleanor studied him, absorbing his words. She didn't offer empty sympathy. She didn't whisper useless comforts. Instead, she said the one thing he wasn't expecting. "You're still running." Cassian's eyes snapped to hers, something sharp in his expression. But Eleanor didn't waver. "You act like Nathaniel Hale is gone, but he's still inside you, and no matter how much you try to bury him, the past always finds a way back." Her words lingered long after she left the room. And for the first time in years, Cassian wasn't sure if he had truly outrun the boy he used to be. The dress was designed to make her fit in, sleek, elegant, deceptively simple. But as Eleanor Hale stared at herself in the mirror, she knew. It wasn't the fabric that made her stand out. It was the fact that she didn't belong. Cassian had said nothing on the drive to the event. No explanation for why he was bringing her. Only orders: listen, observe, don't embarrass me. But Eleanor had no intention of playing his perfect little pawn. The gala was a spectacle of wealth and power, chandeliers dripping light over a sea of silk and diamonds. The room buzzed with whispers, deals made behind polite smiles, alliances shifting beneath the surface. As Cassian Vale led her inside, she felt the weight of their curiosity. Who is she? Why is she here? She was a disruption, and Juliette Laurent despised disruptions. What a surprise. Juliette's voice purred as she approached, her gaze scanning Eleanor like she was an uninvited guest at a private table. She barely spared Cassian a glance. This wasn't about him. This was a test. Eleanor met her head on. "I do love surprises." A flicker of amusement crossed Juliette's face. Then it curled into something sharper. "How charming." She tilted her head. "I imagine it must be overwhelming, stepping into a world that isn't yours." Cassian remained silent, watching, waiting. Eleanor smiled, calm, unaffected. "Oh, I don't know. It seems simple enough." She gestured around them. Money, status, thinly veiled insults wrapped in expensive dresses. Juliette's lips parted slightly, not at the words, but at the delivery. Cassian's eyes flickered with something unreadable. Eleanor tilted her head. "Tell me, Juliette, how long did it take you to master the art of pretending you don't care when Cassian doesn't choose you?" A sharp intake of breath from the nearby guests. She had struck where it hurt. Juliette's expression didn't falter, but something behind her eyes flared. Anger. Maybe even hatred. Cassian finally spoke, his voice smooth, not a reprimand, a closing statement. Juliette, composed once more, smiled coldly and slinked away. But the damage had been done. Eleanor could feel Cassian's gaze on her. Not angry, not impressed, something else. When they left the party, Cassian finally broke the silence. "You enjoyed that too much." Eleanor smirked, glancing out at the city lights. "So did you." Cassian didn't argue. The tension had been simmering since the gala, unspoken, unavoidable. Eleanor could feel it in the way he watched her. Not with the same cold calculation as before, but with something raw, something unsettled. She was getting to him, and he hated it. She found him in the library that night, standing by the shelves with a tumbler of whiskey in his hand. His posture was stiff, his shoulders taut, like a man holding back something he refused to name. "I assume I should be thanking you," Cassian said, not bothering to look at her. "For that little display with Juliet." Eleanor crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe. "You assume wrong." He turned then, his gaze sharp. "You shouldn't have provoked her. She provoked me first." Cassian exhaled harshly, setting the glass down with more force than necessary. "That's not how this world works." Eleanor lifted a brow. "Then maybe your world is broken." Silence stretched between them, thick, electric. Cassian clenched his jaw. "You don't belong here." She took a step forward. "And yet, here I am." Something flickered in his expression. Anger, frustration, something else. "You should be afraid of me," he said, his voice lower now, almost careful. "I'm not." He let out a quiet laugh, but there was no amusement in it. He took a step closer, the air between them tightening. "Then you're a fool." "Maybe," she whispered. "Or maybe I just see you for what you really are." Cassian's breath hitched, just barely. For the first time since she had met him, he looked unsteady. His hand lifted slightly like he was about to reach for her, but then he stopped, fingers curling into a fist instead. "You terrify me." The words were so quiet she almost thought she imagined them. Eleanor's lips parted, her heart pounding. He had admitted it, not his power, not his past, but her. She was the thing that shook him. His gaze dropped to her lips for half a second, just long enough to steal her breath. Then, just as quickly, he stepped back. His walls slammed back into place. "Go to bed, Eleanor." His voice was flat now, detached. She swallowed the sting in her chest, but didn't argue. Because for the first time, she had seen something Cassian Vale didn't want her to see. And he was the one running now. Cassian's patience had already been razor thin. The last few days had left him teetering between control and something he refused to name. Then came the betrayal. Eleanor wasn't supposed to be in the room when it happened, but she had lingered just outside his office door, drawn in by the heated argument within. "You sold information." Cassian's voice was low, dangerous, a beat of silence. Then, a voice she recognized. Darren, Cassian's right-hand man. Or at least, he had been. "It wasn't what you think," Darren tried. Cassian's voice didn't waver. "It was exactly what I think." The sharp shatter of glass against the wall. "You were the only person I trusted." Darren's voice tightened. "Cassian, you're done." The door swung open. Eleanor barely had time to step aside before Darren stormed past, his face dark with something between guilt and rage. Cassian emerged a second later, his expression unreadable, his hands clenched, his breathing steady, in the way a man contained a storm. Eleanor didn't speak. Not now. Because whatever rage simmered beneath his skin wasn't just about the betrayal, it was about what it confirmed, that he was always alone. The threat came later that night. Eleanor had stepped onto the penthouse balcony, drawn by the need for fresh air. The city stretched beneath her, endless, shimmering. For once, she allowed herself to breathe. Then, she felt it. The weight of being watched. She turned, just as a dark figure stepped from the shadows. "You don't belong here." The voice was smooth, practiced. A man in a suit, the kind who blended in too easily. Her pulse spiked, but she didn't move, didn't show fear. "And you are?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. The man smirked. "Someone who cleans up messes, and right now, you're making one." Her stomach tightened. Before she could react, a new presence entered the space. Cassian. His movements were calm, but final. A predator stepping into place. The man took a step back, just slightly. But it was enough. Cassian's voice was ice. "If you touch her, you won't leave this city breathing." The stranger didn't argue, he simply smiled and slipped into the shadows as easily as he had appeared. When Cassian turned to Eleanor, his expression was unreadable, but his hand was on her wrist. Tight, steady. "Stay inside." It wasn't a request, and this time, Eleanor didn't argue. The storm outside mirrored the one inside Cassian. Hours had passed since the balcony, yet the weight of it still coiled in his chest. Someone had tried to warn Eleanor away. That meant they saw her as a weakness. His weakness. And maybe they weren't wrong. She hadn't said much since he ordered her inside, but she hadn't looked afraid either. Instead, she watched him carefully, like she was waiting for him to admit something he refused to say. He had told himself to leave her alone for the night. That distance was necessary. But then, he found her, sitting on the couch in the dim glow of the living room, curled into herself, sleep tugging at her, but never quite winning. Cassian exhaled slowly. "Why are you still awake?" Eleanor blinked, her gaze meeting his. "I don't know." A lie. He knew because he felt it too. The lingering unease. The way the night felt different. He hesitated, only a second. Then, he sat down beside her. Neither of them spoke. Then so softly he almost missed it, she asked, "Do you ever sleep?" Cassian let out a quiet laugh. There was no humor in it. "Not well." Silence stretched between them. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It was something else. Understanding. He didn't know why he did it. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe it was something much more dangerous. But when Eleanor shifted, resting her head lightly against his shoulder, he didn't pull away. She was warm, steady. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was teetering on the edge of something inevitable. His body betrayed him first. His muscles slowly unwound, the exhaustion finally catching up. Cassian Vale, who never let anyone close, who never allowed vulnerability, let his eyes close. And for the first time in a long, long time, he slept. When he woke, the warmth beside him was gone. Cassian woke with his body stiff but rested. Then he saw it. A small note, neatly folded, resting on the coffee table. His chest tightened as he reached for it, unfolding the paper with slow, careful fingers. "You don't have to be alone anymore." The handwriting was small, precise, hers. Cassian exhaled, pressing his thumb against the edge of the note. As if he could erase the way it made him feel. He couldn't. And that was the problem. He had known this day would come. Sitting in his office, his fingers pressed together, he watched the city through the glass walls. The skyline stretched endlessly before him, but the weight in his chest made it feel more like a prison than an empire. The past never stayed buried, and Elias Cross was proof of that. The office doors swung open without warning. Cassian didn't turn. He didn't need to. "Still living like a king, I see." The voice was familiar, low, edged with resentment, a ghost given flesh. Slowly Cassian turned his chair. Elias stood just inside the room, unchanged, despite the years. Same quiet fury simmering beneath the surface. "I was wondering when you'd show up," Cassian said smoothly, leaning back. "Took you long enough." Elias smirked, but there was no humor in it. "You don't get to act like this is casual, Vale." His voice sharpened, laced with something deeper. "Or should I say hail?" Cassian didn't flinch, but something inside him coiled tight. "That name doesn't exist anymore." Elias stepped closer. "It does to me." Silence thickened between them. Years of unfinished business settling into the space. Cassian had wronged Elias once. He had made a choice that left blood on both their hands. And now Elias had come to collect. "I lost everything because of you," Elias said, his voice low. "You climbed your way out, stole a new life, and left the rest of us to burn." Cassian exhaled, steady. "And now," Elias tilted his head, "now you pay." Cassian studied him, considering. He had known this moment would come. But what he hadn't accounted for was the risk to Eleanor. If Elias was here, others would come. And the closer Eleanor got to him, the more danger she was in. This wasn't just about old betrayals anymore. It was about who Cassian was willing to protect. Elias leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "It must be exhausting, keeping up the lie." Cassian's fingers curled into fists against his desk, but his expression never wavered. "You should be careful, Cross." His voice was dangerously quiet. "You're not the only one who's been waiting for this day." For the first time, Elias hesitated. Then he smiled. A slow, knowing thing. "We'll see who survives it then." And just like that, the war Cassian had been avoiding had finally begun. The storm outside had nothing on the one building inside him. He paced the dimly lit penthouse, whiskey untouched on the table, mind tangled in the inevitability of what had been set in motion. Elias was back. The past was no longer just a shadow lurking behind him. It was standing at his door, demanding retribution. And then there was Eleanor. She wasn't supposed to matter. She wasn't supposed to be a variable in his carefully controlled world. But she was. He found her in the library again, curled into the armchair, staring at the rain streaking against the windows. When she looked up, there was no hesitation in her gaze. She knew he was unraveling, knew something had shifted between them, the moment he let his guard down. Cassian exhaled, stepping closer. "You should leave." Eleanor didn't flinch. You don't want that. His jaw tightened. I don't have a choice. Her lips parted slightly. Something flickered in her expression. That's not true. She said it so quietly, so simply, like it was fact rather than a reckless, impossible idea. Cassian had always been a man who held power over everything. People, businesses, the secrets others tried to keep. But he couldn't control this. Her, the way she made him feel. His fingers found her wrist first, sliding up the length of her arm until he could feel her pulse beneath his thumb. It was steady, but beneath it something quickened. Hers or his? He wasn't sure anymore. This is a mistake, he said, his voice rough. Eleanor took a slow breath, her gaze never leaving his. Then why are you still holding on? He was losing this battle. He had been from the beginning. And then she closed the distance. The kiss was not gentle. It was fierce, consuming, filled with everything they had tried to deny. Her hands fisted into the front of his shirt, pulling him closer. And Cassian let himself break. He had kissed plenty of women before, but not like this. Not like she was something he would regret letting go of. Not like she was something he was afraid to want. His hands slid to her waist, fingers tightening, grounding himself in the reality that she was here, real against him. But then, just as quickly as it started, Cassian pulled away. His breath was unsteady, his forehead resting against hers, his world shifting beneath him. This changes nothing, he murmured, a final, desperate lie. Eleanor let out a soft, knowing breath. If that were true, her voice was quiet, unshaken, you wouldn't have stopped. She was right, and that terrified him more than anything. The silence between them was suffocating. Eleanor stood in the center of Cassian's office, arms crossed tightly over her chest, her expression carefully blank. Too blank. But her eyes, dark, sharp, held something he had never seen directed at him before. Betrayal. Cassian exhaled, bracing his hands against the edge of his desk. He had spent years keeping the truth buried, making sure no one could use it against him. But Eleanor had found the cracks, and now there was no turning back. Say it, her voice was quiet, but there was no softness in it. Cassian's jaw clenched. You already know. I want to hear it from you. He forced himself to look at her. She deserved that much. No more half-truths, no more diversions. Elias Cross lost everything because of me. The words hung between them, and for the first time, Cassian saw her waver. She took a step back, like she needed more space between who she thought he was and the man standing in front of her. You destroyed him, she said, more to herself than to him. Cassian didn't try to deny it. There was no use. I did what I had to do. Eleanor let out a quiet, disbelieving laugh. Is that how you justify it? Cassian straightened, expression hardening. He made a move against me first. Her voice rose. You ruined his life. And now, she wasn't sure if he had just ruined hers too. Cassian's phone buzzed. He answered before the second ring. Tell me you have something. Reese hesitated. Not her, but a message. Cassian's pulse hammered as Reese slid an envelope onto the desk. No name, no markings, just a single folded sheet inside. The handwriting was scrolled, neat, deliberate. I warned you, some things were never meant to be yours. Cassian stared at the note, his blood running cold. This wasn't about business. This wasn't about revenge. This was about Eleanor. Whoever had taken her wasn't just trying to hurt him. They wanted to erase her. His fingers crushed the paper into a tight fist. His voice was lethal. I don't care what it takes. Find her. Reese nodded, stepping out. Cassian remained still. The city burned in his reflection. They thought they could take her from him. They had no idea what he was willing to do to get her back. The cold bit into Eleanor's skin long before she opened her eyes. Her head ached. Her wrists burned from the rough rope binding them. The dim light overhead flickered, casting uneven shadows against the bare concrete walls. She wasn't in the city anymore. This place felt abandoned, forgotten. A door creaked open. Eleanor forced herself to stay still, to breathe evenly. Even as her pulse pounded in her throat, footsteps echoed, slow, deliberate. And then, a familiar voice. I was beginning to think you'd never wake up. Eleanor lifted her head, meeting Elias Cross's cold stare. He looked the same, sharp, dangerous. But something was different in his eyes. Not just anger, something more personal. You went through a lot of trouble for me, Eleanor said, her voice rough but steady. Should I be flattered? Elias smirked, tilting his head. You're here because of Cassian. Eleanor forced herself not to react. Elias crouched beside her, watching her with a quiet intensity that made her skin crawl. You know what the problem with Cassian is, he mused. He thinks he can outrun the past, that if he builds his empire high enough, it will never reach him. His smirk faded. But some things don't stay buried. Eleanor's throat tightened. So you took me to get to him. Elias exhaled sharply, almost amused. Of course I did. He leaned in slightly. You're his weakness. The words hit harder than she expected. Cassian wasn't supposed to care about her. He had spent so much time pushing her away, convincing her and himself that she was just a complication. But she had seen it, felt it, in the way he held her, in the way he kissed her. Like he was afraid of what it meant. And now, Elias saw it too. Eleanor kept her expression unreadable. And what's your plan? Elias stood, adjusting the cuffs of his sleeves. Simple. He walked toward the door, pausing just before he left. I break him, and I start with you. The door slammed shut behind him. Eleanor exhaled shakily, her hands clenched into fists. She wasn't naive. She knew Cassian would come for her, but she also knew Elias wasn't just planning to hurt him. He was planning to destroy him. And Cassian, the man who never lost, was finally playing a game where he had everything to lose. Cassian had always been a man of control, calculated, precise, ruthless. But tonight, none of that mattered. His knuckles were white around the gun as he stepped out of the SUV. The abandoned warehouse loomed ahead, a relic of the city's forgotten underbelly. It was the perfect place for a trap. Elias wanted him desperate. He had succeeded. Cassian had spent his life protecting his empire, ensuring that no one could take what was his. But for the first time, he was willing to burn it all down for her. Reese adjusted his earpiece, his tone clipped. We have men surrounding the perimeter, no visuals on Eleanor yet. They're keeping her deep inside. Cassian exhaled slowly. We go in, no hesitation. Reese hesitated. Cassian didn't wait for him to finish. He was already moving. Eleanor sat against the cold wall. Her wrists still bound, her body tense. She could feel it. Cassian was coming. She had spent enough time in his world to know what that meant. It wouldn't be a negotiation. It would be war. The door creaked open. Elias stepped inside, his expression unreadable. It's almost time. Eleanor met his gaze with quiet defiance. You think this will end the way you want it to? Elias smirked. It doesn't matter how it ends. He's already lost. Then, a distant noise. Gunshots. Elias's smirk faded. The first explosion hit. The walls trembled. A shockwave tore through the building. Smoke, shouting, chaos, and then gunfire. Eleanor's heart slammed against her ribs. He's here. Elias swore under his breath, reaching for his gun. But before he could react, the door burst open. Cassian. His silhouette was carved against the smoke, his gun raised, eyes burning with lethal fury. Elias barely had time to aim before Cassian fired. The bullet tore into his shoulder. Elias crashed back against the wall. Eleanor gasped as Cassian strode forward, grabbing Elias by the collar and slamming him against the concrete. You should have killed me when you had the chance. Elias grinned, blood dripping from the corner of his mouth. And you should have stayed the monster you were. Cassian's grip tightened. He could end this, right now. But then, Eleanor's voice. Cassian, don't. His jaw clenched. She was right. Killing Elias wouldn't fix this. Wouldn't take back what was lost. Cassian exhaled sharply and released his grip. Elias slumped to the ground, coughing. Then Cassian turned to Eleanor, his hands already working at the ropes around her wrists. For the first time, she saw it. The relief, the fear, the love. She could barely whisper, You came for me. Cassian cupped her face, his thumb brushing against her cheek. There was never a choice. The fire raged behind them, smoke curling toward the ceiling, gunfire echoing through the halls. But for a moment, nothing else existed. Cassian's phone buzzed. He answered before the second ring. Tell me you have something. Reese hesitated. Not her, but a message. Cassian's pulse hammered as Reese slid an envelope onto the desk. No name, no markings, just a single folded sheet inside. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. I warned you. Some things were never meant to be yours. Cassian stared at the note, his blood running cold. This wasn't about business. This wasn't about revenge. This was about Eleanor. Whoever had taken her wasn't just trying to hurt him. They wanted to erase her. His fingers crushed the paper into a tight fist. His voice was lethal. I don't care what it takes. Find her. Reese nodded, stepping out. Cassian remained still, The city burned in his reflection. They thought they could take her from him. They had no idea what he was willing to do to get her back. The cold bit into Eleanor's skin long before she opened her eyes. Her head ached. Her wrists burned from the rough rope binding them. The dim light overhead flickered, casting uneven shadows against the bare concrete walls. She wasn't in the city anymore. This place felt abandoned, forgotten. A door creaked open. Eleanor forced herself to stay still, to breathe evenly, even as her pulse pounded in her throat. Footsteps echoed, slow, deliberate, and then a familiar voice. "I was beginning to think you'd never wake up." Eleanor lifted her head, meeting Elias Cross's cold stare. He looked the same, sharp, dangerous, but something was different in his eyes. Not just anger, something more personal. "You went through a lot of trouble for me," Eleanor said, her voice rough but steady. "Should I be flattered?" Elias smirked, tilting his head. "You're here because of Cassian." Eleanor forced herself not to react. Elias crouched beside her, watching her with a quiet intensity that made her skin crawl. "You know what the problem with Cassian is?" he mused. "He thinks he can outrun the past, that if he builds his empire high enough, it will never reach him." His smirk faded. "But some things don't stay buried." Eleanor's throat tightened. "So you took me to get to him?" Elias exhaled sharply, almost amused. "Of course I did." He leaned in slightly. "You're his weakness." The words hit harder than she expected. Cassian wasn't supposed to care about her. He had spent so much time pushing her away, convincing her, and himself, that she was just a complication. But she had seen it, felt it, in the way he held her, in the way he kissed her, like he was afraid of what it meant. And now, Elias saw it too. Eleanor kept her expression unreadable. "And what's your plan?" Elias stood, adjusting the cuffs of his sleeves. "Simple." He walked toward the door, pausing just before he left. "I break him, and I start with you." The door slammed shut behind him. Eleanor exhaled shakily. Her hands clenched into fists. She wasn't naive. She knew Cassian would come for her. But she also knew Elias wasn't just planning to hurt him. He was planning to destroy him. And Cassian, the man who never lost, was finally playing a game where he had everything to lose. Cassian had always been a man of control, calculated, precise, ruthless. But tonight, none of that mattered. His knuckles were white around the gun as he stepped out of the SUV. The abandoned warehouse loomed ahead, a relic of the city's forgotten underbelly. It was the perfect place for a trap. Elias wanted him desperate. He had succeeded. Cassian had spent his life protecting his empire, ensuring that no one could take what was his. But for the first time, he was willing to burn it all down for her. Reese adjusted his earpiece, his tone clipped. "We have men surrounding the perimeter. No visuals on Eleanor yet. They're keeping her deep inside." Cassian exhaled slowly. "We go in, no hesitation." Reese hesitated. Cassian didn't wait for him to finish. He was already moving. Eleanor sat against the cold wall, her wrists still bound, her body tense. She could feel it. Cassian was coming. She had spent enough time in his world to know what that meant. It wouldn't be a negotiation, it would be war. The door creaked open. Elias stepped inside, his expression unreadable. "It's almost time." Eleanor met his gaze with quiet defiance. "You think this will end the way you want it to?" Elias smirked. "It doesn't matter how it ends, he's already lost." Then, a distant noise. Gunshots. Elias's smirk faded. The first explosion hit. The walls trembled. A shockwave tore through the building. Smoke, shouting, chaos. And then, gunfire. Eleanor's heart slammed against her ribs. "He's here." Elias swore under his breath, reaching for his gun. But before he could react, the door burst open. Cassian. His silhouette was carved against the smoke, his gun raised, eyes burning with lethal fury. Elias barely had time to aim before Cassian fired. The bullet tore into his shoulder. Elias crashed back against the wall. Eleanor gasped as Cassian strode forward, grabbing Elias by the collar and slamming him against the concrete. "You should have killed me when you had the chance." Elias grinned, blood dripping from the corner of his mouth. "And you should have stayed the monster you were." Cassian's grip tightened. He could end this, right now. But then, Eleanor's voice, "Cassian, don't." His jaw clenched. She was right. Killing Elias wouldn't fix this, wouldn't take back what was lost. Cassian exhaled sharply and released his grip. Elias slumped to the ground, coughing. Then Cassian turned to Eleanor, his hands already working at the ropes around her wrists. For the first time, she saw it. The relief, the fear, the love. She could barely whisper, "You came for me." Cassian cupped her face, his thumb brushing against her cheek. There was never a choice. The fire raged behind them, smoke curling toward the ceiling, gunfire echoing through the halls, but for a moment, nothing else existed. Reality slowed into unbearable stillness. Cassian staggered, his body jolted from the force of the bullet. Eleanor's world shattered. He fell to one knee, his breath sharp, his hand pressed against his side, dark red spilling through his fingers. Elias laughed, a broken, breathless sound. "You really are pathetic, Vale." Eleanor barely heard him. All she could see was Cassian, pale, struggling to stay upright, his breath coming in uneven drags. Panic rose in her throat, but she shoved it down. Now is not the time for fear. Cassian lifted his gun, still steady despite the blood pooling beneath him. One shot, Elias's body hit the floor. And then Cassian collapsed. "No, no, no, no." Eleanor dropped to her knees beside him, pressed her hands against his wound, desperate to stop the bleeding. His eyes fluttered open. The edges of his lips curled just slightly. "You're crying." Her vision blurred. "You're bleeding, you idiot." Cassian exhaled, a slow, pained laugh. "It's just a scratch, you're not funny." His gaze softened. "You're beautiful when you're worried." She clenched her jaw, ignoring the sharp sting behind her eyes. "Shut up and stay awake." He studied her. Something unreadable in his expression, like he wanted to memorize her. Eleanor swallowed hard. "You can't die, Cassian," he smirked, weaker now. "Why not?" She took a shaky breath, her fingers tightening over his. "Because I love you, that's why." His breath caught. For the first time, his walls cracked completely. "Say it again." Eleanor leaned closer, her forehead pressed against his. "I love you." Cassian exhaled, his grip tightening around her wrist. "Then I guess I have to stay." A distant siren wailed, but all that mattered was him, and this time, she wasn't letting go. A life left behind. The city moved on, as it always did. Glass towers still gleamed, deals were still made, power still shifted in silent wars behind closed doors, but Cassian Vale was no longer a part of it. He stood on the penthouse balcony, looking out over the skyline that had once been his entire world. Every building, every deal, every empire, built on control. And now, none of it mattered. The band around his side was tight, the wound healing. But the real ache sat deeper, a weight he had carried for years, one he was finally ready to set down. Eleanor appeared beside him, a quiet presence in the night. She leaned against the railing, looking out at the view with an unreadable expression. He knew what she was thinking. "You're really doing it," she said softly. Cassian exhaled slowly. "It was never really mine to begin with." She turned to him then. "Are you sure?" It wasn't hesitation, it was something else. A reminder that he had built himself into this world, that stepping away meant becoming something new. But Cassian had already made his choice. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a sleek silver key. He turned it over between his fingers, then placed it on the balcony ledge, his final tie to Vale Enterprises. Eleanor watched. The wind threatened to take it, but it remained unmoved. "You spent your whole life chasing power," she murmured. "A name, a reputation." Cassian's lips twitched. "And look where it got me." Her hand found his, fingers sliding between his own. "And now?" she asked. Cassian studied her, taking in the warmth of her touch, the quiet certainty in her gaze. She was his now, not because he owned her, but because she had chosen him. He lifted her hand to his lips. "Now," he murmured, "I chase something else." The wind carried away the silver key, letting it fall into the unknown below, and Cassian didn't look back. A new beginning. The ocean stretched endlessly before them. Waves crashed against the shore with a steady rhythm, a sound of renewal, a sound of something untouched by the past. Eleanor stood barefoot in the sand, the wind pulling at her hair, her fingers wrapped around the warmth of a coffee mug. The world felt different here, slower, softer. She had never imagined this kind of peace, not after everything. A door creaked behind her. She turned. As Cassian stepped onto the porch, a towel slung over his shoulder, hair damp from a morning swim, he looked different. Not the man who had ruled from glass towers and shadows. Not the man who had carried a name that wasn't his. No expensive suits, no guarded expression. Just him, Cassian, hers. "You're up early," he said, his voice still rough from sleep. Eleanor smiled softly. "I like the mornings here." Cassian stepped beside her. His hand brushed against her lower back before settling there, grounding them both. "No regrets?" She tilted her head, studying him. Do you? He exhaled, looking back at the waves. I used to think power was everything. That control was survival. He turned to her, eyes steady. But then I lost you, and I realized none of it meant anything if I didn't have something real. Eleanor swallowed past the lump in her throat. They had survived too much to pretend this was anything less than a choice, a deliberate, fearless leap into the unknown. Together. She reached up, fingers tracing the faint scar near his temple, a reminder of the life he had left behind. You're different now, she whispered. Cassian smirked. You think so? She nodded. I do. His fingers curled beneath her chin, tilting her face toward his. You're the only thing I've ever been sure of, Eleanor. The wind carried away her breath. As he kissed her, slope, filled with everything they hadn't said but had always known. This was their new beginning. Not built on power, not built on fear. Just them. And for the first time, Cassian Vale didn't need anything else. The ring was simple, unadorned, but meaningful. Cassian didn't kneel. He didn't need to. Instead, he took her hand, pressed the ring into her palm. This isn't about claiming you. It's not about control or ownership. It's about choosing you. His thumb brushed against her wrist, against the pulse that beat, steady beneath his fingertips. Every day, for as long as you'll have me. Eleanor swallowed, her chest tight with something vast, overwhelming. She thought of the man she had first met, cold, guarded, unreachable, and the man in front of her now, willing, open, hers. She curled her fingers around the ring. Then she smiled. It's always been you, Cassian. She slid the ring onto her finger. Cassian let out a quiet breath. Like he had been holding it for longer than he realized. He leaned in, pressed his forehead against hers. Forever, he murmured. Eleanor kissed him softly, sealing a promise that needed no words. Forever, she whispered. And for the first time, they had something no one could take away, a world of their own. The night was quiet, the waves a soft hum against the shore. The world felt smaller here, simpler. Just the two of them, wrapped in the kind of silence that spoke louder than words. Eleanor lay beside Cassian on the sand. The sky stretched infinitely above them. For the first time, neither of them were running, neither of them were fighting, just existing, together. Cassian turned his head, watching her as the moonlight traced the delicate curve of her face. She was the only thing that had ever truly belonged to him, not because he had taken her, but because she had chosen him. What? Eleanor murmured, sensing his gaze. Cassian smirked, reached out, brushed his fingers against hers. Just memorizing this, she smiled, laced her fingers with his. You don't have to. I'm not going anywhere. Cassian exhaled slowly. His thumb brushed the inside of her wrist, where her pulse beat steady beneath his touch, a reminder that she was real, that this was real. I used to think love was a weakness, he admitted. Eleanor shifted closer, rested her head against his shoulder. And now, he pressed a slow, lingering kiss against her hair, his grip tightening around her hand. Now I know, it's the only thing that ever made me strong. The wind carried away his words, but she heard them, she felt them. Eleanor lifted her head, tilted her face toward his. Cassian kissed her, softly, deeply. One last promise, sealed not in desperation, but in certainty. Their pasts had been forged in darkness, but they had found their light in each other. And this time, neither of them were letting go.